Great Lakes. I found the entrance to the border around 10 a.m. and started a slow climb up and over the St. Mary River. I stood in awe of the enormity of the Sault Ste. Marie International Bridge. It spans 2.8 miles and elevates 124 feet above the water. It was a trek to cross this thing on a bicycle. I got 3/4 of the way across and the traffic slowed to a halt. A friendly retired couple parked beside me and rolled down the window to talk. The husband was wearing a big trucker cap and had a bushy mustache. We shared stories for over 20 minutes while crawling closer to the border gates. I felt like I was finally getting used to allowing kind strangers to come and go without connecting my heart to them. My friends would say I never knew a stranger, because I'll consider everybody my friend if they give me the time of day. As I'm growing up, I'm learning to set boundaries in my heart, so I don't have to feel these connections as permanent. I feel like in my youth, I was subconsciously taught to give everything I have to everyone. I now know that adults don't live that way. I was able to take this lovely experience and appreciate the moment for what it was. We finally got to a split in the road, and I wished my new friends luck as I went to be inspected. A woman not much younger than me was attending the inspection station. She had a drill sergeant type demeanor and refused to show any emotion. She asked if I had fresh food, alcohol, or money, and I said I had none of those items. The bicycle toll was $1.80, and I hadn't gotten American cash out of my bags yet. I wasn't expecting to pay a toll. I told her I had to get into my bags to find my American money, as they don't accept plastic. I fucking hate tolls that expect us to have cash, let alone a specific amount like $1.80. I'm such a pragmatist, and situations like this make my blood boil. In other parts of the world, they charge even amounts or allow digital transactions. As a millennial, it's easy to look in hindsight at the impractical systems that were built generations before my birth. Why were we forced into using digital money when we still aren't allowed to use it? I'm also not convinced that tolling dollars are used as effectively as we may be persuaded to believe. I started to take my bags apart, and the attendant said, "You should go do that over there," and pointed to the little island next to another toll booth. I pushed my bike up the curb and started digging through my bags. At this point, I was purposely going as slow as possible, as to make it seem complicated and inconvenient to get my money. I found my cash at the bottom of my bag and was transformed back into an American. I found my geographical bearings and made my way towards Mackinac Trail Road. I went through the business district of Sault Ste. Marie, Michigan, and it was depressing. Everything looked run down. No one walking or driving looked happy. Welcome to America. The inhabitants of this town had front yards full of beat-up cars. I saw many four-wheelers for sale in front lawns, and at one point, a minivan that just said, "Free, runs great." I should have taken it off of his hands. An hour and a half in, I found a gas station and grabbed a quick sugar fix with a Little Debbie. Mackinac Trail Road was a small 2-lane road with hardly any traffic and featured a wide, convenient shoulder. There seemed to only be tourists with campers on this road. I saw a post office and wanted to mail a bag of coffee I had bought for my friends. The postal worker immediately noticed my helmet and sparked a conversation. Her name was Sally, and she was a cyclist also. She was wearing a pretty dress with a floral pattern and had the biggest smile on her face. She came outside with me to take a look at my bike. After 10 minutes of talking, she wished me luck, and I was off again to catch the US 2. The border didn't take longer than an hour to cross, so I felt I had an easy day of riding. I arrived at my originally planned campsite in early afternoon and checked out the self-information board. $16 a night. But this place was a dump, with only an outhouse and a single water spigot. I was let down by how overpriced such a mud hole could be. I kept riding and found a spot a mile down the road. There was this pull-out behind some trees that had been permanently etched into the woods, where drivers had been camping for years. Perfect. I wasn't sure if there were bears up there, but my bike definitely smelled like food. I hid my bike near the entrance and camped in the trees about 300 feet away. This place was cozy, but the bummer was it had tons of bugs. The mosquito kingdom emerged from the ashes and was ready to attack. The bugs swarmed all night and into the morning. I woke up at 6 a.m. and jumped out of the tent first thing to shit in a hole. It was a horrific experience as I pulled my pants down and the mosquitoes swarmed from every angle. I tried to get my business done as quickly as possible as I swatted these satanic creatures away from my no-nos. I promptly leapt into my tent to recover from hundreds of mosquito bites. It was a nightmare. I was excited to visit the infamous Mackinac Island. It's an island off the coast of St. Ignace, Michigan, that was turned into a tourist destination. It was originally inhabited by native tribes, and the French used it as a fur trading post in the 17th century. By the 19th century, the U.S. had gotten involved and taken over. My parents were always talking about it growing up, and I never thought I'd have the pleasure of visiting myself. My sister's father-in-law, Terry, is an avid traveler and happened to be driving his new Mustang through the north and wanted to see the island together. We were set to meet in a state park and head to the island the next day. I made it to St. Ignace earlier than expected. This town was littered with nothing but hotel properties. There were no residences to be seen. It was a little disorienting. I was following Lake Huron and it stretched out further than I could see. I had time to kill and wanted to grab a coffee and kick it until Terry arrived. Amongst the weird tourist shops, I found this place called Java Joe. I placed an order and people watched for a couple of hours. I got to meet Joe and was impressed by his laid-back demeanor. He worked at the coffee shop because they were only open 9 to 1. He chatted up the patrons who came in and was a friendly host. He told me how he had traveled a lot in his days and owned a Volkswagen bus that he liked driving across the country. He also owned the only Mexican restaurant in town. It sounded like he would travel in the off-season and run his operations during the vacation season. He explained that he hired international exchange students to run the cafe in the summer. He would give them room and board on top of the wage for working at the cafe to stay in the U.S. between semesters. He told me years ago he met a woman who was cycling worldwide. They stayed in touch, and he let her use his cabin to write a book about her adventures. Hearing that excited me about finishing my trip and the potential of my stories being important someday, which you, as a reader, are now experiencing. I was the last person in the cafe before they closed, and I'm glad they let me hang out. Terry was at our campsite patiently waiting for me. He stands about 6'6", and you can feel his presence, even as humble as he is. A gentle giant, same as his son. Terry is retired and lived near Springfield, Missouri. He was a pilot in his early career and eventually found his way into sales for most of his life. He was an adventurous fellow with seemingly unlimited stories about the stupid things he did as a young lad. He always wonders how his wife puts up with him. He had attempted to hike the Appalachian Trail a couple years back, but ended up hurting his knee and decided to abort. So now he enjoys living vicariously through my stupidly adventurous travels. He saw this weekend as the best way he could support my journey. He was wearing a t-shirt with a 2017 Shelby Mustang with the same exact paint job as the 2017 Shelby he was driving. It was the first time he'd worn it and wasn't sure why he even owned it. We set up our tents while catching up on life, and he asked me a million questions about the ride. It was getting to be dinner time, so we headed to town to check out the scene. He suggested we cross the Mackinac Bridge and see what's happening on the south side of the water. The bridge spans 5 miles long and is 200 feet above the lake. It creates the dividing line between Lake Michigan and Lake Huron. I'd never known it existed until now, and I was excited to put another impressive bridge in my nerdy mental collection. Once over the bridge, we immediately noticed an obscene amount of fudge shops in this town. Fudge was our inside joke for the rest of the weekend. We got burgers at a pub that looked like a log cabin. Terry said he was beyond hungry, but the serving size ended up being gigantic. I finished off my own food and then half of Terry's burger. He was laughing at how I was an endless pit. You really get a lot for your money in these parts, except on fudge. When we inquired about the cost of fudge, we found that it ran about $30 a pound. We decided not to eat dessert. Instead, we returned to the campsite for a relaxing fire, and I had a hot shower to end the day. I was stoked Terry came out, and I was looking forward to Mackinac Island the next day. I mentioned to Terry that I had seen a hotel marquee boasting a breakfast buffet. We packed out our camp in the morning, and I rode my bike to meet him at the restaurant. The buffet was incredible. Eggs, biscuits, bacon, sausage, waffles, and it was only $9. I could have stayed there for another hour, but Terry had his fill and said we couldn't be late to the Mackinac Island ferry. He parked his car while I hit the grocery store for weekend snacks. I dumped all the snacks out of their boxes and into Ziploc bags. It was a bike packing technique to save space in my bike bags. I took the boxes into the store so they could recycle them. You know, because grocery stores usually recycle cardboard. Not these guys. The employee looked me dead in the eye and said, "We don't recycle, but I'll throw this away for you." Bummer. We caught our 10 a.m. ferry and it was surprisingly cold. The wind and rushing water make a big difference out on the lake. As we floated underneath the bridge, big screens played a clip that gave history and statistics about the Mackinac Bridge. 5 million cars cross it yearly. Every Labor Day, they shut down half of it and only let pedestrians go through. I might have to come back for that. This ferry service had a gimmick. They enticed customers with the amazing hydrojets. It had these jet engines in the back that would shoot water 30 feet in the air behind the boat. We became unashamed tourists at this point. Something I appreciated about Mackinac Island is that only bicycles and pedestrians are allowed. In the late 19th century, they passed a law banning motor vehicles. They haul heavy loads around with horses, and you could also take a horse ride tour around the island. It only spanned about 8 miles around its perimeter. As we docked, it felt like rolling into an old Western movie, except everybody wore goofy hats and Disney World t-shirts. The island had at least 5 fudge shops, a Starbucks, endless t-shirt gift shops, and plenty of restaurants. All this was whimsical and fun, but the spectacle of the island are the homes. Old hotels and Victorian homes that still have actual residents. There is a population of under 600 even to this day. The ornate detail and craftsmanship in these structures was to die for. Each house had a unique design and an array of pastel colors. Another sort of magic about the island is the clarity of Lake Huron's water. If you had seen a picture of these rocky beaches, you might have thought they were in the Bahamas. The water is a gorgeous bluish green and completely transparent. I never thought I would say Michigan is one of the most beautiful places in America, but it's worth the stop. Terry and I spent 2 nights on the island, and it was a pleasant respite for us both. The morning we left, Terry woke up a little earlier than me and walked the streets before daybreak. It's quiet and peaceful out there without any people, just the water and the sunrise. When I got up, I brewed coffee to be ready for when Terry got back. I had also picked up a box of chocolate donuts for us. These donuts got me nostalgic because my parents used to get us boxed donuts all the time growing up. Except this time, there weren't 7 people and I was allowed to eat as many as I wanted. We enjoyed our little breakfast and he headed down to grab his luggage from storage. I packed up my bike and met him at the dock for the 8 a.m. ferry. Or at least I thought I was meeting him. I told him the ferry number that I got onto, but he didn't see me anywhere. He went to the wrong dock and was waiting for the wrong boat. I told him to hurry up because it was less than 5 minutes before we left. I laughed as I watched him scurry down the dock and barge into our ferry. I'm glad he made it. It could have been a very depressing departure if we had been separated. We rowed across the vast Lake Huron again to dock in St. Ignace. I was more than honored to have hung out with him for the weekend, and I can't thank him enough for the generosity he showed me. It looks like I'm a part of the family now. Terry grabbed his hot rod while I rode into the sunrise. As I continued through the Upper Peninsula, I witnessed all the secondhand tourist traps that try to lure in vacationers as they drive west on the US 2. Cheap motels and pasty shops. I never knew what a pasty was, and at first utterance, it doesn't create the most alluring picture in my head. I found out that a pasty is a savory beef stew crustacean. It's like a hybrid between a pot pie and a calzone. It sounded like it had potential, but I'd be okay with not eating one. The US too follows the Hiawatha National Forest, which also parallels the northern shoreline of Lake Michigan. I had lived on the southern end of Lake Michigan for 10 years of my young life, but had yet to explore this northern tier. Seeing that part of the lake was another bucket list item I never knew I wanted. Back when I was a kid, we drove all over Wisconsin and Michigan to state parks and summer camps. I felt like I was 9 again, except I didn't have adults bitching at me in a church van. The landscape was lush with forest and sand-duned shore. Every morning would start with a dense fog, hardly allowing 30 feet of vision, due to the mixture of heat and the lake's moisture. There was a rest area every 15 miles and a campground every 30 miles in the national forest. It felt like a great place to enjoy the outdoors. But where there is vast wilderness, that means less society. I had to rely on what I could carry in my bags. I pulled into a parking lot in the town of Epiphet. I witnessed a semi tailing a pickup truck as the truck braked to turn into a parking lot. The truck went from 65 to 45 in a split second, while the semi pulled to the left going towards opposite traffic, completely dominating this tiny 2-lane road. Watching this unfold, my life flashed before my eyes, and my thumb was ready to dial 911. Thankfully, there was no wreck, but semi-trucks were a prominent theme in the UP. I never felt unusually unsafe around them. Still, they basically ruled this road. They were heavy load trailers with 30 wheels and carried logs or giant machinery. It's a whole different world up here. I found a fun stealth camping spot one night where I slept behind a baseball diamond in a city park. I arrived around sunset, and the only people I saw all night were a mother and daughter riding horses in the forest behind. The grass was damp from the rain earlier in the day, but I was thankful to find a mellow spot tucked away from the road. I decided to wake up early so I wouldn't get caught by any townspeople, and I stopped for breakfast at a diner down the street. It was 6 a.m., and I figured I wouldn't see anybody in the place. I scoped the scene as I walked in and found a handful of good old boys who, in my mind, screamed the definition of Canuck. The sway of their voices completely emulated everyone I met in Ontario. Their plaid sweaters and trucker caps completed the aura. It felt like a scene straight from the movie Canadian Bacon. These fellas boasted about their various professions and compared the land they owned in this great state of Michigan. I kept to myself, but they gave me the eye like the truckers in that large Marge scene in Pee-wee's Big Adventure. The next day, I had an exciting breakfast encounter. As I was locking up my bike, I saw this gang of 19-year-olds with NASCAR sunglasses and white tank tops. They rolled up on Walmart mountain bikes and looked tough, though their scrawny 120-pound builds didn't intimidate me much. Just more good old boys. One of the kids started asking me about my ride, since I was obviously loaded up for traveling. He was blown away that I could ride my bike this far. He told me he hadn't left Michigan his entire life, and that it's hard to find a good job around that area. He went on about the property he had just bought and was figuring out what to do with his life. Everyone in the UP is just searching for a simpler life. It was rad to find out they were pretty chill guys after I had vibed them so hard in my imagination. I finally went into the restaurant and searched every table until I found the only one left that had an outlet. After getting my coffee and cookies, conveniently priced at $2, I sat down and powered up. Not even 5 minutes later, this business-looking guy showed up and asked if he could join me. I was annoyed because all I wanted to do was chill out and check my Facebook. He had a laptop in his hands and looked like a younger Dave Ramsey. He mentioned how he was restarting his life after a 20-year military career. He moved back to his home turf in Michigan and was trying to start a small business. He told me he had a bike in storage but needed to rebuild it. He lacked time and resources. The struggle is real. We chatted sporadically while conducting our own computer business. When I got ready to leave, he said he wanted to post about my ride on his Facebook. He saw these 10-year-old kids sitting beside us and said, "Hey you're young. You probably know how to work this thing better than me. Do you want to take a picture of us real quick?" We took the picture, which was too dark, because of the windows behind us. We tried again at the same angle and got the same result. I attempted to edit with the tools on his phone, but that also didn't work. Finally, we just got the kid again and took one with us facing the window, and it came out clear. I think I'm a professional videographer. I helped him figure out how to post my website on his Facebook, and we were off to our separate lives. I ended up getting nothing done, but I guess that's the price I pay for accommodating others. Throughout the UP, I saw these gas stations called Christ. It made me laugh because I love a little sacrilege. They had this deal of the day, a 99-cent 2-liter. I'd been wanting to add water capacity to my bike since getting a new frame strap attachment in Canada. I was daydreaming about chugging a Dr. Pepper only to refill it with water. Speaking of water, Canada's storms had decided to follow me west. Storm clouds chased me daily, and I experienced hours of rain on several occasions. The rain forced me to choose wisely where to camp. One day, while it was starting to get dark, I found myself ending in a tiny town with a single stoplight. By the speed of the wind, I knew rain could dump on me at any moment. I had to simultaneously find out where to sleep for the night and to at least temporarily shelter myself from the storm. I spotted the city park and found it to have a covered picnic area. It also had a raised stage and electrical outlets. Suddenly, I was hidden from the road, safe from the elements, and living in the luxury of electrical energy. The moment was serendipitous. The next day, I rode 40 miles without seeing a town and shut my brain off until I could stop for lunch. I planned to stay in the city of Iron River, and the rain caught up with me once again, this time with a concerning amount of lightning. That made me uneasy about camping outside. I was also hurting sorely and felt an acute sense of loneliness. I saw a billboard for a hotel called the American, and it boasted of having a hot tub. Coincidentally, it was the first place I saw while riding into town. I parked myself under the awning outside of the building and stole the Wi-Fi to check the beat in this town. American was coming up as $110 on Google, so that was out of the question. I called the only other hotel in the city, and they were fully booked due to vacation season. The internet wasn't showing any close camping options, so I was now in a tough spot. The clouds swooped in within a few minutes and poured a treacherous rainfall. I didn't need much more convincing to figure out it was worth a shot to bargain with the American or pay full price at worst. I just didn't want to be stuck in the rain. The lobby was a large 2-story room with a log cabin theme and a 12-point antler chandelier. I inquired about the price of a room, and the attendant said, "Well, the construction rate is $76 with tax." I forgot I had my fluorescent vest on, and the construction company working on the roads in town got a special discount. I said, "Sold," and asked if they had an elevator to get my bicycle to the second floor. She looked at me and said, "Are you working or riding your bicycle through town?" I said bicycle, but she had pity and was cool with giving me the discount. It felt like I had won the lottery to get a room there. Big hot breakfast in the morning, pool, hot tub, sauna. I wiped off my bike with a towel and slowly trudged to my double queen room. My wet sandals were squishing every time I took a step, and I was the happiest little penguin you ever did see. This place was the perfect solution to a sad storm and the end of my time in pure Michigan. If the hand state was defined by rain, Wisconsin would be defined by cold and trees. Before I crossed the state line, I had to mentally prepare myself for a brutal day. The temperature read 56 degrees at 9 a.m., and a steady mist floated above the abnormally wet air that I was about to swim in for 78 miles. I entered the Ottawa National Forest and found a visitor center that proved to be great for a quick lunch break. There was a museum with Wi-Fi and picnic tables outside. I had this cappuccino powder packet lying around in my bag and decided this was the perfect weather for a warm drink. I boiled some water on my jet stove and slipped my moist hands out of my gloves. My body was so cold that my wrists couldn't stop shaking as I attempted to mix up the cappuccino. I started cooking a ramen bomb while I held my hands over the hot water. Some teenagers came over to talk to me and said they were a part of the National Youth Corps. They maintained trails and parks for the Forest Service during the summer. I was stoked to hear that they were doing such a cool thing, and I encouraged them to travel and see the world as soon as they got the chance. I left the park and was back into the misty abyss. I got a flat tire 20 miles from my host home and couldn't believe it. I wanted to throw myself into the forest floor and rot into the earth. I was so cold and pissed. I daydreamt about dumping coffee on my face just for warm thoughts. This was a frigid rain that never let up. The culprit for the flat tire ended up being a tiny staple, which also caused my last flat. I only had 8 flats throughout the entire trip, with a doozy of 3 in one day back in Texas. I still wasn't happy about having to tip my bike over and take the back wheel off. Rearranging the chain, gears, and brakes was a tedious task, though the procedure only requires 5 to 10 minutes. I had tube switching down to a science, and I knew I needed about 200 to 250 pumps to get a tire to the adequate PSI. It's one hell of a workout, but stroking my right hand 200 times in one sitting is something I was used to as a 27-year-old man. I cursed the sky for this misfortune during an unusually groggy day in July. I texted my host to let him know I was running late. Russ offered to pick me up, but I knew I needed to finish this day for my self-worth. He said to be careful and mentioned the temperature had dropped to 46 degrees. I was freezing my ass off. I arrived in the town of Bessemer at dusk in front of a yellow 2-story house. There was a short man with a plaid tied-up hat standing outside. My host was a 73-year-old winter sports enthusiast named Russ. He moved there in 2009 after retiring. He got a deal on the house and liked the area because it was near ski resorts. It also wasn't too far from his original home of Minneapolis. He rented the upstairs room to a man a couple years older than him. He explained how uptight and conservative the tenant was. Russ sat me down, gave me snacks and a beer, and we talked and talked and talked. He was both divorced and widowed. He had competed in every winter sport next to the luge. He told me how all of his kids, except one, had moved to other countries, and how proud he was of the amazing things they had accomplished in their lives. Russ also had a great sense of humor. He would crack dry jokes about everything, and I was excited to hang out with someone so easygoing and sarcastic. He warmed up the pasties he had cooked for us earlier. I told him I hadn't had one yet. Russ helped me become a real UP local and cross off a rhubarb pasty from the list. He served in the National Guard for 6 months, making him eligible to be a member of the American Legion. I'd never known what the Legion was, but it made sense to me that it would be a place for military members to hang out. It features a cheap bar with a pool table and food specials a couple times a week. He boasted about the place and offered, "Why don't we go over there? I can introduce you to all my friends." It was less than a block behind his house. A couple of people were at the bar, and the bartender knew Russ by name. The building was small, with a bar area and a pool room separated by a wall. He introduced me to everyone and tried to puff me up to all of his friends. He's a natural storyteller, the kind of person you wish you could get coffee with twice a week. He was really making me look good to all these hardy servicemen. We headed into the pool hall, and I noticed pictures of brass bands dated from over 50 years ago. This particular Legion post had its own marching band. Someone back in the 1950s started the band, and it has been a source of pride for the community ever since. My dad played in city brass bands growing up, so I understood the culture a little bit. We got around to playing a couple rounds of pool, and Russ was way better than I. He made this determined face and licked his lips every time he lined up for a shot. He gave me some tips on cue handling, and that helped me win our second game. The local Lutheran pastor caught us off guard as we headed out the door. Russ told him my story, and he rifled an onslaught of questions. He had this tic that drove me crazy, though. Every time I'd answer his question, he would say, okay, okay, yeah, oh, yeah, yeah, okay. It was obnoxious, and my brain couldn't stop focusing on it. This night was exactly what I needed after being destroyed in the cold rain all day. A warm bed, warm meal, and warm conversations helped me feel human again. It was healing to meet a retired man who was open-minded and not a hardline conservative Christian. The following day, I met the man who rented the upstairs of Russ's house. His name was Rob, and this guy looked straight out of the 40s. A fedora hat with one side folded up, and a tan overcoat with khaki slacks. He started telling me about what he did in his life. He got laid off when he was my age and used the severance pay to travel the world for 8 months between jobs. After that, he traveled the world for his career. Rob mentioned that he used to ride bicycles, but would never touch one again due to 2 unfortunate accidents. As a kid, he was riding on the street and the handlebars failed, which caused him to fly right over the top and smack the right side of his face on the pavement. Then, years later, a car cut him off, and he flew over the handlebars and hit the left side of his face. He just couldn't get a break and decided his bike riding days were over. He told me it's good to travel when you're young because when you get older, you just want to stay home and don't enjoy getting on planes or leaving the regular routine. Those are wise words indeed. Russ offered to ride with me to the next town over so he could show off the new rail trail that had been completed that year. The trail was paved and had ample areas to stop and sit, even trash cans and recycling bins. 21st century, baby. He told me he had ridden the trail before they paved it, when there were only railroad ties. He had an accident where something snagged his front tire and launched him over the edge of a bridge, and he landed on a truss 3 feet below. Had he not caught that truss, it would have been about 20 to 25 feet to the grass below. He said he got out of it with a cut-up face and some stitches. At 70 years old. This dude is living the life. We got to the end of the trail and said our goodbyes. He wished me safety, and I said I'd be all right as long as I didn't get killed. He came back by saying, "Well, I hope it's me before you." That statement hit me pretty hard. It made sense, but it was really heavy. Personally, I don't expect much out of my life. I almost expect that I'll die young if cancer doesn't get me. My outlook is, if I'm not dead by 50, I'd better keep living. I've never aspired to be a successful professional. I've never wanted to gradually build my way up to making a certain amount of money. I live my life as if I'll have no regrets when I'm gone. I do the things I want to do and don't try to chase things that will make me reliant on a salary. I'm very disillusioned to existence. Being on the road reaffirms that loving other humans and discovering new things are the best things we can believe in. Stay curious and don't harm others. Russ seemed good at taking life how it is and enjoying it. So I'll hold on to that and see where it gets me. I met a lovely couple while in Wisconsin, Kip and Marianne. They had spent their careers in education and ended up retiring on a sleepy farm a few miles from Lake Superior. Kip worked many years in Alaskan national parks, and Marianne taught gifted elementary children while authoring curriculum-based books. They decided to buy a property and attempt to live self-sustained. They built their house from the ground up and raised 6 gardens along with an orchard of many species of trees. When not cooking or tending to the property, they were master bird watchers and sincerely appreciated nature and the life they were privileged to sustain. Getting to their house was one hell of a trek, though. It was slightly uphill for 4 miles of dirt road. Once I arrived, they showed me a place to park in the garage and prepared a delicious dinner of chickpea spaghetti with lentil meat. Dessert was a vegan cheesecake, and Marianne drew a bicycle out of currants. All this left me in tears, primarily because of how gentle and incredibly creative these two were. They were both soft-spoken, yet generous in the outpouring of information they had to share from their respective lifetimes of experience. We talked for a couple of hours before retiring to our rooms. The next morning, we ate a big salad for breakfast with more currant cheesecake. They showed me their guest book and told me stories about all the cyclists they have hosted over the years. They always take a picture and print it out for the book. They hosted a woman who rode 20,000 miles solo over 2 years around the world. She was 51 at the time and wrote a book about it. Some others were riding over 100 miles per day just to get across the country as fast as possible. They asked me to write about my journey. Marianne started reading my notes and said she couldn't read half of them. So I interpreted and she rewrote them for me. I have really shitty handwriting and was probably hastily writing something profound to leave my legacy in rural Wisconsin. I got my things together and mentioned that I planned to make some peanut butter sandwiches for the road, but they stopped me before I could grab the stuff out of my bag. Marianne gave me some homemade gluten-free bread with sunflower butter and raw honey. I just couldn't believe how thoughtful and caring they were. But alas, I had to say my goodbyes. I wished them well as I rode off into the next state on my adventure. I ended my time in the UP by traversing the land of 10,000 lakes, Minnesota. Late in the afternoon, I arrived in Superior, Wisconsin, and discovered only 2 ways to cross the St. Louis River over the state line: US 2 and Interstate 535. US 2 was under construction near the bridge and required a detour for bicycles. I scoped out the downtown as I weaved in and out of heavy machinery and broken streets. It felt like weaving a maze of a Mario Kart level. I looked for the bridge in the distance and kept following whatever pathways got me closest. It took me about 20 minutes to finally get to the bridge, where I found a pedestrian path across the water. That was great and all, but this bridge was steep. It would be difficult even for someone walking. I started the ascent on this very slow and narrow sidewalk, getting hit by 30-mile-an-hour winds in every direction for a mile. It took me 30 minutes to get up and over before I realized the bridge didn't lead straight back into US 2, like the signs led me to believe. It curved to the north over 2 miles out of the way. I was completely lost in a random industrial area of Duluth, Minnesota. It was 5 p.m. and I was exhausted and frustrated. I found a route that would get me back to US 2, but it required taking side roads for what felt like 5 miles. I grabbed a little dinner and tried to plan out where I would stay for the night. When I left the restaurant, I realized my fluorescent vest had blown off my bike and got lost somewhere in the distance. Oh, I was pissed. There also wasn't a campground for another 15 miles. Not to mention, it would cost $35 without any showers. I wasn't particularly stoked about that situation, so I started to ride west aimlessly and figured I'd just pass out from exhaustion anywhere that felt safe. Getting out of Duluth was treacherous. I had to climb a 7% hill that visibly had no end in sight. I rode for what felt like forever and eventually gave up. I started walking my bike up the hill and called Kara on the phone to let out all my steam for the day. I was in a very stressed headspace and thankful she was willing to listen to me. I took the easy riding for granted earlier in the day. I didn't give myself any emotional headspace to handle this much adversity. I was just plain angry. I got off the phone after 25 minutes and didn't feel much better about my situation. Dealing with these challenging moments by myself never got easier throughout the trip. I feel like in the beginning, I could at least laugh them off. The more I had to pull up my bootstraps, the more I felt angry and bitter. I really missed home and wished I had a friend who wanted to feel this pain and adventure with me. I climbed and made it to the top, which left me in a residential neighborhood. I started at 44th Ave and climbed up to 88th Ave, over 40 blocks of 7% incline. Dumb. The road finally turned flat again, and I felt like I'd rather tumble back down the hill to my death than continue for the day. I rode aimlessly until dusk when I spotted a train bridge in the middle of nowhere. A small operating booth stood next to a short wooden bridge where two tracks lay on top. The operating booth completely covered me from the road, and once it was dark, I wouldn't have to worry about being seen at all in the shadows. I felt safe and at ease after a treacherous few hours. Little did I know that my troubles were just about to start. I set up my tent and sat down to read for about an hour until the darkness set in. I felt my eyes slowly close themselves into what I hoped to be a delightful dreamland. I don't know when it started, but in the middle of the night, trains passed right over my head and simultaneously to the side of my tent. These tracks were less than 4 feet away from my sleeping body. The trains were monstrously loud and rumbled the ground as if an earthquake was occurring. These overnight trains sustained for hours and into the daylight of early morning. It was scary, stressful, annoying, and just about what I expected to come from the end of that kind of day. I woke up around 5:30 a.m. and decided to get out of there. I was salivating over the next opportunity to chug gas station coffee and have a hearty breakfast. I expected to not have any real food until lunchtime, but that's when my luck kicked in. I rode only a mile down the road and saw a gas station. I walked inside and found a full-service diner. I was ready to drown myself in greasy truck stop food. The place had a couple tables and maybe 5 booths. I sat at the table and knew I stood out like a sore thumb, because the 3 other patrons all turned their heads to look at me. Superstition. The waitress came over to take my order and introduced herself as Cheryl. While I told her where I had ridden from, the guy at another table started butting in and asking me how I ended up out there. His name was Wayne, and he was a trucker who found himself coming around Duluth frequently. Cheryl seemed to have worked there most of her adult life and enjoyed getting to know the folks. They were really curious and great question askers. I could barely get an order in because we were having such a good time chatting. A middle-aged couple eventually joined our conversation too. It felt like a big, happy family. The room was so small that it felt like we were all just sitting around a kitchen table together. By the time I was finished with my food, some of them had donated cash and Wayne paid for my breakfast. That diner really welcomed me with open arms and felt like a true community. I went over to Wayne's table to say goodbye, and some more truckers had joined him. We talked about the routes I was going to take, and they gave me the seal of approval for my westward journey. It brightened my spirits to make new friends and engage in meaningful human interaction. My loneliness subsided for now, and I felt full. If the diner filled my heart, this next experience depleted it. I often stopped at McDonald's to use their Wi-Fi and charging stations for the small price of an ice cream cone. One day, I stopped for a snack and witnessed a couple of hyped up gentlemen piled into the booth behind me, starting a ruckus. They seemed to be in their 40s, yet were acting like 5-year-olds. They were cussing up a storm and decided to air their grievances about life at the highest volume they were capable of. It was obnoxious, and I couldn't believe how disrespectful they were acting. After a 15-minute onslaught, they were about to leave, and I breathed a sigh of relief. To my disbelief, the scene shifted drastically. A disgruntled man, smelling heavily of alcohol, came up from another booth to confront them. He started yelling in disgust and preaching how he served in the military. He continued to explain how the government hadn't taken care of him and how he felt thrown away like trash after all he had done for this country. He was very inconsistent because he had just accosted the dudes about talking shit on the government minutes before. He was definitely having an episode, but thankfully, the guys at the table had enough sense to de-escalate the situation by speaking calmly and listening rather than rebutting his emotional filibuster. I decided to bail before things got heated again. My last host home in Minnesota was with a couple who I had stayed with on a skateboard trip a couple years previous. Len and Patrice were unassuming, kind folks who retired in a log cabin facing a beautiful lake in northwestern Minnesota. Their property was surrounded with trees, and the living room had a vaulted ceiling with a wall of windows facing the water. Their home was cozy, and I felt lucky that they were kind enough to allow me to stay again after a cold call a few weeks earlier. I convinced them that we should get dinner at a pizza place they hadn't been to in 20 years. It was a great venue for catching up on our lives. We spent 2 hours at the restaurant, and they told me all about their marriage and lives growing up in Minnesota. They were lifers of the North and had lived a pretty good life. They kept asking if I had enough food, and I was laughing because I was happy to have any food that wasn't ramen. The following day, Patrice woke up before me and cooked a humongous breakfast. Eggs, bacon, pancakes, and enough food for 8 people. I ended up eating most of it. She handed me the leftover pancakes and pizza in a Ziploc bag, and I gladly accepted. They knew someone at the local newspaper and set me up for a phone interview later in the day. The reporter asked me questions like how far I was going and what made me want to take this big of an adventure by myself. I grabbed a photo with my hosts on the way out of town, which was used in the paper the next day. I told Len and Patrice I'd keep them updated about my journeys. I invited a phone call anytime they were thinking of me. Man, I'm slowly becoming jaded. I often wonder about what creates nerves of steel and that don't give a shit attitude that I see in people older than me. I presumed it's having kids, getting married, and working in management that create this coming of age response to adverse conditions. I'm starting to see this bike ride as my growing up by thrusting myself into any and every situation that comes at me. I have to adapt. Learn to respond in a way that keeps me on track toward the goal. But the goal isn't only finishing this trip. It's also discovering the person I will be at the end. Who will I be in the future? Right now, I still feel like the same stupid idiot, but at least I can manage to smile. I am patting myself on the back for not having a panic attack.